Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. The Trump administration has announced a new round of sanctions against Iran and warned countries doing business with Tehran to sever financial ties or face retaliation from the United States. Iran responded by insisting it was prepared. U.S. President Donald Trump has once again signaled his desire to resume talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, posting 3 photos of himself with Kim from their meetings in Singapore and Panmunjom on social media. Canada says it's not a subsidiary of the United States and that it will return to trade talks only if Washington treats it as an equal partner. This comes as Trump threatened to hike tariffs on automobiles originating in Canada. Continued conflict between Washington and Tehran is widening from financial networks to one of the world's most important shipping routes. The United States is threatening Iran's trading partners with secondary sanctions, while Tehran has blacklisted dozens of tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Our Oh Soo-young starts us off.
Washington has announced a fresh wave of sanctions on Iran and countries trading with it, labeling the move as an economic D-Day for Tehran. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Monday that the latest campaign would target the international networks helping Tehran trade, evade sanctions, and finance its weapons programs.
Every country has a defined timeline to shut down activities we have identified. If they do not take action, we will do so unilaterally through Treasury authorities. For example, every branch of Bank Melay must be shuttered and dark. And let me be clear, any entity that facilitates money laundering on behalf of Iran will be removed from the U.S. dollar system. The clock just started ticking.
The move comes nearly 6 months after the United States launched military operations against Iran. With the latest measure, Washington expands the risk of secondary sanctions to transactions involving 5 key sectors: digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping. It also blacklisted more than 60 individuals, entities, and vessels allegedly helping Iran acquire nuclear and missile technology, conduct cyber operations, and generate oil revenue.
Iran's enablers purchase, transport its petroleum. They facilitate the flow of its finances through exchange houses and free trade zones. They welcome Iran's flights and maintain registries on its behalf. They turn a blind eye to seaborne fuel transfers and overland transits. They condone illicit use of their banks, all the while concealing the extent of their complicity. The president is making phone calls to world leaders with specific requests to cease their interactions with the regime. We are already seeing results.
The targets span China, Hong Kong, the UAE, Singapore, Switzerland, and Europe. Bessent said countries had been given deadlines to halt activities identified by Washington, although he declined to disclose them. Iran responded by insisting it was prepared. Economy Minister Ali Madanazadeh said Tehran had devised a 2-year plan to withstand the sanctions. Meanwhile, Iran's newly established Persian Gulf Strait Authority blacklisted 45 tankers for allegedly violating its transit rules, including 5 owned by South Korea's Sinokor Merchant Marine. Iran did not specify what rules the ships had breached, but threatened them with fines, detention, and the confiscation of their cargoes. It also warned that vessels transferring cargo to or from those ships could face similar action. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
A busy week lies ahead for Korean stocks with key events at home and abroad on the calendar. Nvidia's earnings and the Fed's Jackson Hole Symposium could test the outlook for a potential market rally. Our Kim Jun-ho reports.
Monday's Korean stock market closed lower, with the benchmark Kospi down 3.12% from the previous session. Market heavyweights closed lower, with Samsung Electronics down 8.7% despite last week's hopes for major shareholder returns. The market saw sharp swings last week as rising U.S. Treasury yields weighed on sentiment, pushing the Kospi down to the 6,400 range at one point. Several key events could shape Korean stocks this week. First in focus is Nvidia's second quarter earnings scheduled for Wednesday local time. Markets expect another record result, with the outcome likely to shape sentiment toward global chip stocks.
If Nvidia beats expectations and offers a strong outlook for the AI cycle, especially for its new GPUs, that could lift market sentiment. Recent reports of possible GPU price hikes next year could also suggest continued strength in market demand.
The Jackson Hole gathering set for Friday local time will also be in focus in what could be one of the most closely watched symposiums in recent years. Fed Chair Kevin Warsh's speech will be the key event as investors look for clues on whether and when U.S. rates might rise. U.S. personal consumption expenditures or PCE inflation data will also be closely watched as it is the Fed's preferred measure of inflation. Meanwhile, the Bank of Korea will decide on its key interest rate on Thursday. The central bank raised the rate to 2.75% last month, signaling further hikes if needed. Since then, data closely watched by the BOK have come in positively, with second quarter growth beating expectations and consumption and income staying steady. However, inflation and high household debt still remain concerns for the overall economy and markets. Kim Jun-ho, Arirang News.
Now for more on how the U.S. sanctions on Iran could affect the global economy, as well as the Fed Chair's highly anticipated speech this week, we're joined today by Professor Park Min-jung, professor at the Department of Business Administration at Kumo National Institute of Technology. Professor Park, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
So, the Trump administration has now announced a new round of sanctions against Iran and also called on other countries to cease their interactions with Iran. So how could these sanctions affect global oil prices and the broader global economy?
Yeah, the key issue is the extent to which Iranian oil is actually removed from the global market. Because oil supply is relatively inelastic in the short run, even a modest disruption can generate a disproportionately large price response. If the sanctions are extended to third countries and companies dealing with Iran, the impact could be amplified further. Importantly, oil prices may rise even before physical supply is reduced as markets incorporate a geopolitical risk premium. For the global economic perspective, this would represent a classic negative supply shock. Higher energy prices also raise production and transportation costs while reducing households' real purchasing power. The combination can weaken growth while increasing inflationary pressure. So the main variables to watch, therefore, are the actual decline in Iranian oil exports and any potential disruptions to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, and the U.S. national debt is now over $40 trillion for the first time, and last week the country's 30-year Treasury bond yield hit a new 19-year high. What does this tell us about the current state of the U.S. economy?
The $4 trillion debt level is significant, but the more important is the cost of financing that debt. The raise in the 30-year Treasury yield indicates that investors are demanding greater compensation for holding long-term U.S. government debt. This reflects not only inflation expectations, but also concerns about government borrowing, rising treasury issues, and a higher term premium. The central issue is the government's debt service burden. If interest rates remain elevated, refinancing existing debt becomes increasingly expensive. So there is also broader macroeconomic implication. Long-term treasury yields influence mortgage rates, corporate borrowing costs, and overall financial conditions. So as a result, higher government borrowing costs can constrain private investment through a crowding out effect.
Right, and while that's happening, gold prices hit their highest level in more than 3 months, and Bitcoin surged to its highest level since late May. What do you think is behind this, and what does this tell us about investor sentiment?
The more important point is not simply that gold and Bitcoin are both rising, but that we are seeing a strong movement between two assets with traditionally different characteristics. Actually, gold has long been considered as a safe haven asset for a long time, while Bitcoin has generally behaved as a high volatility risk asset. Under a conventional risk of environment, we would not necessarily expect them to move in the same direction. Their simultaneous rise therefore suggests that both assets may be responding to a common macroeconomic factor. In financial economics, this can be understood through the concept of time-varying correlation. Correlations between asset classes are not constant. During periods of heightened fiscal, monetary, or geopolitical uncertainty, assets and also that normally behave differently can become more synchronized because they are responding to the same underlying shock. So gold continues to serve as a traditional store of value, while Bitcoin is also increasingly perceived by some investors as an alternative store of value or so-called digital gold. So that this current movement may indicate not simply stronger risk appetite, but a broader effect and also broader effort by investors to diversify away from conventional dollar-denominated financial assets.
Right, and a lot of attention is now focused on the new Fed Chair Kevin Warsh's speech later this week. The key will be whether he provides any clues on the timing of when interest rates might rise. What should we be watching for?
So this issue at Jackson Hole is not just for timing of the next raise and next rate increase. More importantly, markets will be trying to understand the new federal chair's policy reaction function. First, investors will focus on how he characterized inflation. If inflation is considered as a persistent rather than temporary, markets are likely to interpret that as a more high risk and more high signal. Also, secondly, his assessment of the labor market will be critical. A resilient labor market would, given the federal greater room to tighten policy, while signs of weakening employment would raise the threshold for further rate increases. And finally, the language itself will matter. Terms such as data dependence or persistent inflation or financial conditions and inflation expectations will provide important clues about the policy framework. So ultimately, the speech is less about identifying a specific data and also specific dates for the next move and more about understanding the conditions under which the new federal leadership is prepared to change policy.
Right, we'll have to keep a close eye on that speech later this week. All right, Professor Park, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
U.S. President Donald Trump has once again signaled his desire to resume dialogue with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Trump posted 3 photos of himself with Kim on Truth Social on Monday, including images from their first summit in Singapore in 2018 and their meeting at Panmunjom in 2019. The posts are being seen as another conciliatory message to Pyongyang, following Trump's order to significantly scale back South Korea-U.S. joint military exercises. North Korea has so far shown little interest in responding to Trump's calls for renewed talks. Notably, none of the photos were from their 2019 Hanoi summit, which ended without an agreement. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio have agreed to maintain close coordination on North Korea's nuclear program and peace on the Korean Peninsula. According to Seoul's Foreign Ministry on Monday, the two officials spoke over the phone, with Cho saying the South Korean government would work to ensure President Donald Trump's recent messages lead to renewed dialogue with North Korea. The two also pledged to pursue mutually beneficial outcomes on tariffs and investment, shipbuilding, and security cooperation. Rubio briefed Cho on developments in the Middle East, while Cho expressed Seoul's willingness to make a practical contribution towards restoring freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The ministers agreed to meet in person soon for further talks. Canada says it's ready to resume trade talks with the United States, but not on terms that undermine its sovereignty or industries. The warning comes as U.S. President Donald Trump threatens to raise tariffs on Canadian vehicles and auto parts to 50%. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
Canada says it is willing to return to trade negotiations with the United States, but only if Washington treats it as an equal partner. Prime Minister Mark Carney said Monday that Canada will not accept an agreement that leaves Canadian industries permanently disadvantaged or treats the country like a subsidiary of the United States.
But an attitude at the negotiation table that Canada is a subsidiary of the United States, that Canadian industry is going to be disadvantaged relative to American industry, that we're going to set up terms so that over time, Canadian industry is going to face constant headwinds. That's not something we're going to accept.
The comments came after President Donald Trump imposed 50% tariffs over the weekend and threatened to expand them further. Trump also announced Monday that tariffs on all Canadian cars, trucks, and auto parts could rise to 50% beginning January 1st, 2027. The latest escalation follows the collapse of trade negotiations last Friday. A proposed deal would have reduced U.S. tariffs on Canadian cars and light-duty trucks from 25% to 15%, while cutting tariffs on aluminum and steel from 50% to 25%. But talks broke down over several unresolved issues, including whether tariff relief would also cover medium and heavy-duty trucks. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, meanwhile, said Trump also wants Canada to return to the negotiating table in good faith.
I think he would like Canada to come to the table and negotiate in good faith. They were offered quite a good deal last week. They chose to reject it.
The dispute could have major consequences for the highly integrated North American auto industry, potentially raising costs for both manufacturers and consumers. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Consumer sentiment in South Korea has dropped in August for the first time in 4 months. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the composite consumer sentiment index stood at 104.5, down 2.3 points from the previous month, though it remained above 100, meaning optimists still outnumber pessimists. The central bank noted that despite solid economic fundamentals, domestic stock market corrections and cumulative inflation weakened consumer outlook, driving down overall sentiment. This follows months of gains driven by strong semiconductor exports. Hyundai Motor's labor union and management reached a tentative wage agreement on Tuesday after a series of strikes. The deal capped 111 days of negotiations with a monthly base pay hike of 100,000 won, or $72, and a performance bonus worth 400% of base monthly pay. The union estimates the deal is worth an average of 40.84 million Korean won, or about $29,400 per member this year. The agreement also includes hiring 500 new production workers by 2028 and dropping 10 damage claims the company have filed against the union. The deal follows a cumulative 60 hours of strikes this year, including the union's first full-day walkout in a decade last week. Union members will vote on the agreement on August 31st. South Korea's Gyeonggi-do province is supporting the development of games that anyone can enjoy, including older adults and the visually impaired. They're so-called socially contributing games, expanding their scope from mere entertainment into the realm of welfare. Our Cha Yoon-kyung reports.
The goal of this game is to find and press a button on the physical cube that matches the shape or color of the answer shown on the screen. This game is currently under development to help improve the cognitive ability of older adults. Another company is creating board games that the visually impaired can enjoy using their sense of touch. Players find the correct answers by feeling the unique shapes and engravings on the blocks. These are all socially contributing games that Gyeonggi-do Province has been supporting since 2023. The province provides 30 million won in development funding to selected companies.
The digitally vulnerable face difficulties in accessing and enjoying games. We launched this project to bridge this digital divide and build an environment where everyone can enjoy playing games together.
However, some point out that continuous support is needed, moving beyond mere development funding to actively helping these companies secure sales channels and enter the market. Cha Yoon-kyung, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Choo Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In the United States, the Trump administration is pushing to make its huge visa fees for skilled workers permanent. The Department of Homeland Security posted the proposed rule on Monday and would set the fee at just over $103,000 for new H-1B visas covering highly skilled foreign workers. Previously, those visas used to cost between $2,000 and $5,000. Trump temporarily imposed a higher fee last year, and it expires next month. The new rule faces legal challenges, but could become finalized by the end of the year. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Iran tried to kill one of his sons. Netanyahu said on Monday in a phone interview with Israel's Channel 14 that, quote, Iran tried to murder one of my sons. He did not say when the alleged plot happened or which son was targeted. Netanyahu was answering a question about reports that Israel's Shin Bet security agency refused to give protection to a political rival ahead of the October election. He said he told the security agency chief that every candidate for prime minister should get proper security. In Haiti, gangs raided a neighborhood overlooking the capital on Sunday night, killing at least 30 people. The mayor of Kenskoff released that death toll on Monday. Kenskoff, a hillside town above Port-au-Prince, has been attacked by gangs around a dozen times since last year. Residents said the dead were killed just minutes from a police station and demanded the local police chief step down. The government has promised to restore order. New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon said on Monday his party will put a bill to Parliament banning children under 16 from social media. Platforms would have to verify users' ages and could be fined up to 10% of their global revenue. Luxon said social media is exposing children to harmful content and addictive technology. It is not clear whether the bill has enough votes to pass, and one of Luxon's coalition partners says it will not support it.
Heavy showers were pouring across the capital area in western Gangwon-do province early this morning. Most of the rain has eased, leaving extremely high humidity. A dual-use sun and rain umbrella will be a must today, as we are still looking at a chance of passing showers, as well as strong sunshine and the heat. Seoul remains under a heat wave warning, while the Gyeongsang-do provinces are seeing temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, most of central parts of Korea will see some passing showers through the evening with 5 to 60 millimeters in the forecast along with thunderstorms. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 32 degrees. Daegu, Gyeongju, Busan, Gwangju will all get up to 35 degrees under sunny skies. Meanwhile, 4 typhoons have developed over the southern seas. They should not directly impact Korea, but the hot and humid air associated with typhoons could help keep the late summer heat going across Western Korea.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.